right, welcome in everybody. Thank you so much for clicking on this video, and thank you very much, William Reed, for joining me yet again for another video. Last time we hung out, we were at Irenji, and we
Yep.
did a collaboration there. I played a little bit of Shakuhachi, and you painted a beautiful image there. So it's good to see you again. Glad you have.
Yeah, thank you. Has it been that long? I mean, I know we communicate on social media quite a bit, so it doesn't seem that long, but
It's
I
been
guess
over
it
a
has
year.
been a while. Yeah.
And since that time, you've had a book come out. And
Yeah?
I definitely want, before we get into Shin Gyo Soo, I definitely want this book to be talked about.
Okay. Well, this is Song of the Brush, Dance of the Ink, The Path to Self-Discovery Through Japanese Calligraphy, published by Morgan James Publishing in New York. And this is the characters. So you have brush, song, and then sumi or ink, dance. So that's the title of the book. And one of I mean, I go into a lot about calligraphy, but one of the things that I really like about it is I painted that same piece 30 years ago, and it's in a dojo in Virginia now, and it's like really just martial arts. It's really like heavy lines. It's not bad, it's balanced and stuff. But then this was like 2 years ago, so it's a complete transformation.
Yeah, it's very different. The first thing that I noticed is your is the way that you use ma, and that's another thing that I think it's very. I think in the Western mind, many people think of it actually as kukan, just like white space, but it's much more than that. It's like all balance, and I noticed a complete difference.
Internally and externally. It's inside the characters as well as between and on the sides, up and down, and there's space everywhere.
That was the first thing that popped out to me, is like really a huge balance difference.
Interesting. Well, to me, the biggest change has been working with the kofude. The really small, delicate, precise strokes. And that actually has transformed my work with bigger strokes. I can feel the line, the core lines that connect them much better than I was in the past.
Well, so today I have you here. A lot of my students ask about Shin Gyo Soo, and we have pieces in the Shakuhachi literature that are called something Soul Nani Nani, Gyo Nani, Shin Nani Nani, and my students have a hard time understanding that. Well, I know that Shin Gyo Soo, I have a pretty good understanding of it. I did a little bit of calligraphy. I know it's a calligraphy term, so I thought, why not bring in a calligraphy master to help with this? So sharing the screen, Shin Gyo Soo.
Yeah.
So let's go. Here we have the three characters.
Yeah. So you want me to comment on those, or in terms of calligraphy?
Yeah, we can talk about them. I guess let's just go over the meaning first, because we have three distinct characters here.
Yeah. So the first one literally means truth, or you might say the precise picture, but it's truth. And then the second one means to move or to go, and the third one means grass. But those are abstract terms. In calligraphy, it means printed on the left. That would be printed style. And in the middle, it would be semi-cursive, and then on the right, it would be fully cursive. So it's a degree of articulation versus articulating each stroke versus making them somewhat connected or very connected.
I like to think of this first character for my students as well, like the word shashin is a perfect reflection.
Yeah. That's a really good, and makoto meaning truth, so it's a really accurate picture. There's nothing abstract. It's very distinct, right?
Yeah, true copy. And so what I have, I think that was perfect. That's exactly how I express it to my students very often. And so I thought, why don't we look at an example of the three characters. So we have the character Mu here, a very popular one amongst Shakuhachi players as well. And then in the three styles. So calligrapher mind, what do you see?
Okay, people say, well, how do you get that from the first one, right? They can kind of see the connection between Shin and Gyo, but So is just so abbreviated that it's sometimes a huge jump. But actually, what I do is I I've found that there are technical differences in how they're each painted that explains it much better than just saying it's more or less cursive. And if you'd like, I can briefly go into what those are.
Yeah, let's definitely.
And how the brush is used. Okay, so for the shin, which actually is often called kaisho in or the printed style, the important thing is that each stroke has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a rhythm to it. So you touch, you go, and you finish. Each stroke very deliberately articulated, and I think of it like aiming, like shooting an arrow. You have to aim. That's your first touch, and then you shoot. It's quite fast, and then you finish. And then, so they actually have 3 words for this. Kihitsu is where the brush wakes up, where it literally touches. It's almost like a spear. You spear the paper, and it opens up like a fan. This is a very small brush, but it opens up, and then you shoot the arrow, and you hit the target. So tone, sut tone is the way we explain that. And that's articulated for every stroke, vertical, horizontal, whatever. And there's a kind of a stately rhythm to it. And the other thing that they refer to this as a spear. You can kind of see why. And so in kaisho, the difficult thing is to reveal the spear. And what I mean by that is, well, here's an example of kaisho and gyosho and sosho. That you can see that the edges of the corners are articulated a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's where the you lift the brush and touch down so that the edges of the strokes, you can see where it comes out and it goes across. Or this one's a good example. You touch, you go, and you lift and touch again. So the spear is actually sticking out. So it looks like a fluted, or it has a kind of a 3. It's not just a straight bar, right? That's called revealing the spear. And that's the challenge of kaisho, is doing that with the right rhythm and keeping, the strokes equal intervals and things like that. And it's really difficult. But once you get the rhythm of it, it's almost always the same. So you get a lot of repetition. Now for gyosho, it's more about the kimyaku, or the continuity of strokes between. So some of them are connected, or some of them are connected in the air, like an airborne stroke. And so even when the brush is off the paper, it's still making a stroke, even though it's in the air and it comes down and you pick it up. So that would be the kimyaku, or the key line, the energy line that connects them. That's the challenge there. And then by contrast with sosho, which is a direct contrast of shin, is concealing the spear. So you literally will, when you come out of, before you turn the corner, you come back inside and you come out. I don't know if it's very easy to see.
So you kind of come in and then you kind of double back, so you hide.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of examples of that. For example, in this one, which goes, I'm doing this backwards, so it's a little bit difficult. But and then it comes down here, and it comes up, and it comes down, but it comes up a little bit before coming around, and then out. And so that you're not really revealing. This one is another example. It's very common, where you come here, and instead of just going around the corner, you come in a little bit and then shoot out the side. So that's called concealing the spear. In Japanese, zoho, literally putting the spear in the warehouse. But concealing the spear, as opposed to roho. Ro is roshutsu, the word to reveal or to come out, like do. So revealing the tip of the spear versus concealing it. Those would be the two extremes. And what's in the middle is the kimyaku, the energy line. So those are the technical differences. And I find in teaching this to students is that once you explain that, it's a lot easier, because what they tend to get trapped in is on the shin, they don't know how to control the brush. The hand shakes, or it goes to an angle instead of straight, because they're not really aiming. It's like they're shooting or they're doing one of two things. They're either not really aiming, and therefore it goes somewhere else. It actually goes exactly where they tell it to, but they're not aiming where it's supposed to go. Or they release the arrow or the brush with not enough energy. It's like tossing a beanbag with not enough energy to reach you. It just like drops, and therefore the stroke gets weak. So that's the huge challenge with kaisho. Mm-hmm. But with the others, it's how you manipulate the brush in to keep the line going or to conceal the spear.
Mm-hmm. And then there must be also a sort of formality that's used. Like kaisho has a specific time and place that you would use it. Gyosho has a specific type, as well as sousho. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Sure. Well, this is really counterintuitive, but historically, sousho is older than kaisho.
Oh, actually, I didn't know that. I thought it was the other way around.
Yeah, you would think that they started with this and then they gradually made it more, But that's actually not. And then there were several different styles that existed before sousho. So of course you have the bone inscriptions, and then you have the tensho, which is like the seal script, which resembles the seals that you put on the red seal that you put on a painting. And it's highly stylized with lots and lots of almost looks like a maze with all these strokes going this way and that and bending around corners. And then they had this that was kind of difficult, was awkward to write because there's so many strokes. So then they made the scribe script, which is the one with wavy characters like you see on sake bottles a lot.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and that was faster to write, and so the scribes would basically write it. I think they were actually slaves, but anyway, they would have to make all these documents and copy many, because they didn't have copy machines, obviously, or photographs, so they would have to literally copy them by hand, so they needed something faster. And then they needed something even faster than that, or more abbreviated, so they came up with sousho.
Hmm.
And then but that was hard for some people to read, so they kind of, let's make it a little bit easier to read, and then eventually they came up with kaisho, and then that actually is the origin of the modern fonts. So you look at Japanese fonts that have tapered, like the Mincho font, that's tapered strokes based on kaisho.
Mm. Mm.
So it keeps evolving, but there are all these different scripts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'd like to move on now to the next part of Shin Gyo Soo's in some of its cultural context, and a look at actually bowing and the different.
Oh, okay.
That. So I thought that would be actually quite interesting. So here we have the soul, the informal bowing, Gyo as a semi-formal bowing, and Shin as formal bowing. And I've seen this more often than not actually in tea ceremonies and going to like kaiseki. People come in and introduce the meal or something like that. And I found this to be very interesting.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's interesting that they describe it in this way. I would actually think that maybe informal is one way to describe it, but it's not casual. That's an important distinction. It's not just like, okay, hi, how you doing, right? Yeah. There's a rhythm to it, and it is. I mean, look how she's dressed, right? It's very formal. It's just that it's slightly more abbreviated, so you're not going all the way down in the bow. And I think I would describe it. So, yeah, I don't know if informal is the way I would describe it, but it's more abbreviated or shoryaku. They have something called ryakure, which is the in Iaido, where instead of doing the formal bow, where you literally lay it down and bring the cord around and do the deep bow, it's done like standing here, and then you sheath the sword in your obi. So I think it's more abbreviated rather than informal, or it depends on how you think of informal, but it's not casual.
Yeah, I think it's a hard distinction for us, because especially in the modern age, if someone says the word informal, I think they do assume casual. I think for us, even for me, I see her dress. I see the type of the type of obi that she's wearing, and she's wearing the white tabi. So many things cue for me, but for someone who's not into Japanese culture, wouldn't pick up on that right away. So that was a very good catch.
Yeah. Well, also, there's a rhythm and a pause. So you're talking about ma, a few minutes ago we were talking about ma. And so there is the pause, and that automatically makes it somewhat formal, even if it's abbreviated. It's not just hey, how you doing? And I guess the closest thing to casual would be what they call the eishaku, where, you just you're standing and you just acknowledge by dipping your head in that person's direction. But there's no like lining up the fingers. But to me, whenever the fingers are lined up and you're actually pausing, it's still formal.
Yeah, yeah. What would you? How would you categorize the difference then of circumstances for using Sol, Gyo, and Shin for in bows? Most of the time, through my tea experiences, it depends on what they're using within the tea ceremony and what event it might be. Because most of the tea events that I've gone to are Sol, where the greetings are, as we would say, formally informal. Yeah, but nonetheless, there's still a grace about it.
Yeah. Well, you might think how erai are the guests, right? How venerated are the guests? And I would think you'd begin and end with a more formal bow. Mm-hmm. So that's a real distinction between the opening and the closing. And then for the others, because if you had to do a formal bow between every action you took, it would take forever, and it would break up the rhythm actually. So I think it's just they call kekkai. Kekkai, that means making a line that distinguishes the what is it? The sacred space from the the ordinary everyday world. And so they will lay down the fan in front of them, in front of their knees, and then they bow. And so they're actually showing respect for that line. And then when you cross over into the other person's space, that's also the sacred space. So a lot of that is just acknowledging, and maybe even for the samurai, not making any sudden movements, because they can be quite dangerous, right? Yeah. You're just going through and it's very measured and tempered, and there's no surprises.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that as well, about surprises, I've actually heard a story that for where they would keep the matcha powder, they would actually show the inside of the matcha container to show that there's no poisons or nothing added inside of it to the samurai.
Yeah. Although that's before they put the matcha in, because poison in the tea was one way that they would do people in. So, who's preparing that tea? I mean, there's ways. Of course, if you're showing it's empty, but it usually has the matcha powder already in it, and then there's the water, and there's all kinds of ways, I guess.
Yeah, there are many ways to kill people.
Yeah,
old Japan and modern Japan. Okay. So I thought this would really give people a headache too, because
that's brilliant.
What I love about Shin Gyo Soo is that it's not just Shin Gyo and So, it's actually Shin no So, Shin no Gyo, and Shin no Shin.
Yeah.
And this just adds another layer of complexity. But I think that because the garden is so visual, especially a path, a walkway, I think that this might be a really good way to help the students understand some of those ideas.
That's brilliant. That's one of the best explanations that I've seen of what's in between, rather than just three different styles, right? Mm-hmm. So it's I guess when they the Shin no Gyo or Shin no So, it's a mixture. It's a transition between. And actually, if you think about nature, that we use words like sunrise and sunset, but in fact, there's no light switch going on and off. It's just a seamless transition, and then you realize, the sun's gone down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like these examples. I think we can see. So, of course, this is Italian, but forma, shin, form. So the form of it is shin. We can see this clear, straight path, material. Yeah. See all these different sizes and shapes, and this idea of natural things that you would see, functioning with nature. Then you see like the formal shin, and the material is shin. You even see these really clear cut. These are obviously man-made shapes.
Yeah.
Now the gyo for me is a little bit confusing on this because the form of it. I don't actually see Gyo, and just in my estimation, I actually still see form Shin, but I do see the materials as Shin and Soul being
Yeah,
mixed here.
yeah, yeah.
Would you agree with that estimation?
Yeah, well, I think the material being Shin and So mixture is more obvious because it's such a contrast, and maybe the form of Gyo being that it's not really it's kind of switches back and forth. Say the rhythm going from the smaller stones on the left, and then they shift to the right, and they sort of stay on the right. So it sort of changes lanes, if you will. And so maybe that's the idea that it's in motion and it's not just one pattern that's same repeated from top to bottom.
Oh, I see. Moving between those different
Yeah.
materials. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense to me. All right. Well,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, we got a couple other tabs here I would like to get to.
Sure.
Here is for ikebana
Oh, okay.
and the different shapes of the bowls that are used to put the plants in
Ah.
as well. Um, and I think this is more of an image for people to see. You can kind of see the circular motion. The Shin is a fixed shaped, and the soul is. And I've seen really crazy bowls for
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's an interesting distinction. So whether it's squared corners or rounded or even, sort of natural shapes that just aren't any particular geometry. So I guess Shin would be the most geometrically recognizable, and then even the Gyo, I suspect that that's probably not a perfect oval. Maybe it's slightly thicker or more broad on one side, and then of course at the bottom they're just like leaves or.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
All right, here's our ikebana for the shape of the for the tree. I don't really know much about ikebana in Shin Gyo Soo, but the reason why I wanted to bring so many different styles in here is because Shin Gyo Soo is not something that's just permeating in music or in calligraphy. It permeates in all
Right.
aspects of Japanese culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, okay. Uh-huh. It just reminded me, one of the first techniques, well, the first basic technique in Iaido is called Shin, and it uses the same character, and it's like the most basic thing. It's just ichimonji, just cutting, and then a makko. So it's literally horizontal and vertical, and it's quite powerful, but it's the first technique that you do. And the others are not called Gyo or So. They have different names, but in Aikido we have a process that they used to use like Kaisho, Gyosho, and Sosho because that was recognizable to a lot of people. And then my sensei started calling them by a different name, Kotai, as in Ikko, Nikko, like counters, counting one. So Kotai would be Shin, the Shin body, where every stroke is countable. It's you do this, you do this, you do, almost like you're taking a picture of each frame in the waza. And then Juntai is like Junban, or going in sequence, so they're more connected. And then Ryutai is like flowing, like water flowing. And that would be Sosho.
Okay, and we have one more image. I thought this was fascinating.
Ah.
So not only is it just for arts and martial arts, but so this would be for a captured fugitive, and apparently for the different styles of the rap, actually shows you the rank of that person who is captured.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I found that to be really, really fascinating. And
That's interesting.
just to show how much or how deeply this aesthetic idea permeates through all of Japanese culture.
So the Shin would be the most formal, the higher ranking prisoner, or what is that how it works? Or
Yeah, higher ranking prisoner, and then it would just go down from there.
When you first showed it to me, I thought these are like chord training, where the Shugenja will do that because they make these patterns and they'll tie little chords and things around them. But apparently, it's not.
I bet they also have that too, though. I bet they have that same idea of Shingo and Soul. And I bet even in this case too, they could have a Shin no Soul. So depending on what the fabric is that they're using for the ties here.
Mm.
So
Well, it looks. it looks to me like the So, it would be pretty easy to get out of that if you wanted to. It's just like, just slip your hand right out. But the others are a little bit more secure.
So maybe it's this one, the guy in Shin. That's a dangerous guy. He'll get out.
Yeah.
The Gyo,
Yeah.
he's not that skillful. I'll put him
Yeah.
in Seoul. He doesn't know what he's doing anyways.
Slow him down. Yeah.
He's not going anywhere. So
Interesting. Where'd you find that one? I've never seen anything like
I found
that.
that actually on a martial arts page. So really interesting clip there for that one.
I'm curious, Sean, if you could explain to me how Shingyo and So work in Shakuhachi.
So it's the way that I've always of understanding it is soul is to make a decision with the music. So the way that my teacher always explained it to me was if you take a single breath of music and you play it 5 different ways in terms of like dynamics, shaping, colors, and then you decide at that point, okay, I like this way the best. This way makes the most sense to me, and it becomes more natural sounding. And so it's almost the way I think about it is you become unorthodoxly orthodox, and you kind of have so the way that I almost also think about it too is that Shin is going to be the copy of the teacher. Whatever your teacher does, you just act in
copy. Yeah.
The Gyo is you kind of divert here and there. You might do things a little bit differently, but then the soul becomes your own soul. So soul sounds like soul. You put that in. It's your own ideas, your own creation, and with that, it becomes natural. So it's the way I also try to link it with my students as well is, for example, in Kyudo they have the Shin Gyo Soo idea as well. It's kind of like this, checking every single technique, and I like this counting of each move. Where when someone first does Kyudo, they'll stand in the position and they have like 1, 2, and then 3.
Yeah, they're all numbered. Yeah, there's an illustration and a number with every step, right?
But then when I watch like the master Kyudo guys, I see every single motion being fluid as one, where everything comes connected together. So in the Shakuhachi sense is that when you're listening to the performance, you don't hear like a thought. It doesn't feel like I decided to play this. Now I'm playing this for you. Okay, now I'm breaking. Okay, I'm thinking about what I'm going to play next. Now I'm playing it for you, and so on. So one thing that I do is I try to show my students players who are playing within a ryuha, this is the way the school plays this piece. And then I show them Watazumi, who does whatever he wants and whatever Watazumi wants to do. And here's what I find interesting. I'll put up the same piece by him, 6 different ways he played it. And each way is different, but it's all recognizably the same piece. And it almost sounds as if that's how he's always played it his entire life. And it's natural, but it's spontaneous but natural. And controlled. And so then my students go, well, that's great. How do I do that?
Yeah. Well, it sounds a lot like jazz, or another thing in the shuhari that comes from the No theater, where shu is to protect mamoru, where that's really like shin. It's the exact copy. You follow the kata exactly as it.
Okay, now before we were so rudely interrupted by Zoom's time limit.
Exactly. Yeah. So I was starting to say that it sounds a lot like shuhari, which is the terms that Zeami used to describe various aspects of no drama. And shu means mamoru, or to protect, which would be similar to shin. It's a copy. It's sticking to the kata in very strict forms, not deviating. And then ha is yaburu, which means to break. So it means you're modifying or adapting the form in some way. It's still recognizable, but you're making a creative adaptation of some part. And then ri is hanareru, or to drift apart. So that literally is maybe the freedom element of so-sho.
How much within there? I think that there's going on to more of the shakuhachi route and the musical route of it, is that there's like a clear line between what is free and what is improvisation. And what is the line in calligraphy, in the world of calligraphy, where this is soul and this is just you, you know, paint.
Yeah,
This isn't actually within the genre of soul. You're improvising off of this.
yeah, yeah. I would say the main difference is whether you have a tejon or not,
Mm.
right? If you have a tejon and you're trying to do a social, uh, people get kind of drunk on the motions, like like it's going all over the place. But actually, it's very very disciplined, and there's a tightness to it that really holds it together. Especially if you're trying to duplicate the tejon, even though it's social, it's like trying to play John Coltrane exactly as it was transcribed, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He was like free, but you're trying to duplicate something. So that would be a disciplined form of social. The other one, though, maybe that you're talking about is like where there is no tejon and you're just producing something, pulling it out of the air. But I think actually, when I do something like that, I will still have in my mind some pattern, something. I mean, obviously, there's stroke order because in order to qualify as shoto, it has to be legible. It has to follow the rules of not necessarily stroke order, but it has to be recognizable in one of the within the range of legibility. Right? It's not just whatever you feel like, but some people do really abstract stuff, so it's not even. It's more like sumi painting. It's not really writing, or maybe they're the only ones in the world that can read it. Right?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that where it definitely becomes into the quality of sumie and not
Yeah.
and not to shodo, and I think that that's a really good description of it too because we can definitely take pieces and I can just improvise and riff off of them, and that's actually one of the things I have my students do is I have them improvise on a piece in order to free themselves up to be more creative, and then I say, okay, now take all those ideas and then just reel it in, and
Yeah.
try to, when you make a decision, it's I often ask my students, if, okay, why are you doing it that way? Why?
Uh,
What about this decision makes the piece more the piece for you than if you
yeah.
did it, right? Rather than just saying, oh well, there was this spontaneous moment that I felt that I was just going to add, and I was going to riff for 20 seconds. Okay, well that's not
Yeah.
so. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, like in foreign language, for example, I can improvise in English because it's my native language, and I can improvise in Japanese because I've been speaking it so long. But I can't improvise in Chinese because I've run out of ideas, and it wouldn't make any sense, and it would just be like, you get stuck. So you have to have a repertoire. You have to have something, and the patterns that you are using might not be recognizable to the person who's not familiar with the genre. But to somebody who knows it well, I see a hint of that.
Hmm.
So there's something, but you're putting it together in novel combinations. But actually, my favorite way of doing that is not to just take little pieces and like assemble them from different, like a puzzle, but rather to the references that I use are not even characters or calligraphy at all. It's music or sounds or some experience.
Hmm.
Like when I painted the characters for karate, after doing the Okinawa origins of karate documentary for NHK, the director asked me on the airplane on the way back. He says, "Can you paint the characters karate for us?" Oh, sure, I'd be happy to put it in the program. How soon do you need it? Tomorrow afternoon. So I don't know if I had paper or what. I had no tejon or anything. So what I did was I had the two characters, facing. It was almost like two karate masters sparring. So I would actually picture their faces, and of course I stuck with the stroke order, and I gave it a little bit of a what you call it, semi-cursive. But I think I can pull that up so you can see what I mean, because I put and it came out really well, and they put it in the. Hold on just a second. They put it in the program in the first part of the program. So, where is that?
Yeah, and so I think I like that that idea too of taking from other places and using
Yeah,
these ideas, even though it might not be necessarily a part of the. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
right. So this my tejon for this was the karate masters that I had spent time with. So my conversations with them, the feeling of expressions on their faces, and it's not literally painting a portrait, but I had that in mind, and that affects the quality of my movement because I'm not looking at any teihon to copy, right?
And just for everybody to know, when Reed Sensei is saying teihon, he's talking about the one that you would look at it, the a version of it on the side, and you would be using that as your basis
The model, yeah.
model for making.
Yeah, so there's nothing here to copy. This was just out of my feeling of the people that I'd met during that week.
Yeah, and so I feel, and I think that there's definitely a sense of that within the soul playing of shakuhachi, is that there are experiences while learning the pieces, but also experiences of hearing other people play the piece and learning the piece and developing a kind of a relationship with it that where you put individuality from an experiential standpoint, not just I'm feeling this right now randomly, and now I'm going to do that now. I don't think it's that type of spontaneity. But I also find what's really interesting too is by playing a lot of the pieces in outside. And if I play a piece and let's say a really big gust of wind comes by, well, that makes me want to add in some like muraiki sounds, which is that kind of the bellowing of sounds, right? And then that experience that I had later says, okay, well, when I played this piece for 5 weeks ago in the mountains, this moment happened, and now I'm going to start adding it in the piece because it reminds me of that, and it was really special for me. So I think that that's something more individualized through an experience, or if I'm listening to a recording and I absolutely love the way that this guy plays this one line and only this one line, and I just have to do it that way because I'm so inspired by it, so I put that in there. That's a lot more of this mixing of materials.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I like that expression. Yeah, mixing materials. As you know, I'm reviving my former days of tap dancing. So I'm taking lessons from a guy in Austin, Texas, a brilliant teacher, Terrence Bennett. And I've talked to him a lot about improv because we have a gala festival at the end of September where I've volunteered to perform improv. And so he's given me some ideas, and he said that first of all, it has to make sense musically, and there are specific taps you need to make clear sounds, and it has to fit the music in some way. But there are ways that you can do it. Like there might be a sound in the music. I don't know if you know the cantaloupe. It's a anyway. US2 did this thing, and they have this where they're kind of improvising with their voices. Bibbidi dop, bibbidi dop, dop, and you can actually do that with your feet. A shuffle, da 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 da. And if you do it at the same time or as an echo, it really works because people can hear it and they recognize, oh, there's a conversation going on. And then the other thing he said is that you can go longer repeating, riffing a certain step. You can go longer than you would think because it takes people a while to even recognize what you're doing. And if they hear it, and if they just hear it once, they won't even recognize it. They hear it again and say, oh, something's happening. They hear it the third or fourth time, and then they start, oh, there's a pattern. And you can't go on forever, but you can stay with it longer than you would. And maybe you have a mixture of a few phrases that you can put together. But to do that, even 2 or 3 minutes is a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this conversation because even for myself, I think for a lot of artists, when we think about this concept of Shin Gyo Soo, it is, especially when we get over to soul, it's almost like this mysterious thing. It's like and Japanese love this. I think they love the shroud of mystery. Which makes, like, for someone like me who really wants to have like a clear-cut definition of something, and it's not provided, it becomes really stressful. But definitely hearing even a lot of things you were telling me, it's actually helping me even solidify a lot of the ideas that I've recognized as being soul. And even today, that this, looking at the materials of something and the form of something also helps, even deepen into a way that could really give you a headache.
Yeah. Well, Alan Watts described it, a phrase that I read back in high school, and I still remember it. He called it the controlled accident. So there is elements of spontaneity and discipline at the same time, and if you sacrifice one for the other, you've lost it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there is a release feeling, but there's also the control feeling, and it kind of shifts back and forth, almost like a dance between control and spontaneity. But it's not just doing. A quick story: a friend of mine went to got an MFA in the States, and one of the people in his class was handed in a project, which was he'd taken a sandbox and he'd released a worm in the box, and the worm made some tracks. And he handed, that was his graduate thesis, that was his project. And he called it Worm Tracks. And the professor gave the worm an A and failed the student because you didn't do it. It was the worm that got the credit, you know.
You know, what this, what came to mind, the two words that came to mind from before the worm story was leaning into the mistake.
Oh.
And I can't tell you how many times something weird happens on my flute, and I just kind of go with it. I don't want people to know I didn't do something I planned for, but there's a lot of times where something weird happens and I just go with it. I let that sound happen and I ride with it, and even sometimes I develop off of it. And so it does become a very spontaneous moment, but it's almost spontaneous out of necessity then that I must develop off of it, because if I don't, then it becomes not a part of it. It's
it stops, right? Yeah, breaks the flow. Well, that's interesting because
I like that word you just said there too, which is the flow of it.
Yeah,
the grass just flows and grows wherever it wants to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So if there's a mistake that happens, well, obviously the grass wants to go that way. So it's you kind of have to go with what the instrument wants to.
Exactly, and what is genetic biological development? It's just there's a mutation, and then it sort of somehow works. You know, next thing you know, it's like mainstream, or scientific discoveries. That how many of those were accidents? Penicillin, I think that was not a planned discovery at all. It just kind of he went to the petri dish and there's something growing here, and then that led to the discovery of penicillin.
Mm-hmm.
So creativity does require the being open to those. I don't even know if mistakes is the right word, but planned. This is a term actually comes from career planning. There's a Stanford professor that came up with this. It's called planned happenstance. So you have a plan, say in your career, something happens, and you take a stance towards it.
You know, as a short story as well for my in my composition career, I wrote this piece for cello and piano, and the cellist who's performing it, brilliant cellist, and as she's working through the piece, she plays something wrong in the piece, but it's so much better than what I wrote, so I never told her. But I waited till the recording happened so I could change it afterwards. And once the piece happened, I said, you played this line wrong every single time the same way. And she's like, why didn't you tell me? It's because it sounds better. So happy little accidents.
Yeah. And there's the other thing is that there are accidents that happen in practice, and those that happen in performance. Right, and maybe there's a different stance that you would take to those. So you can play with the ones in practice more, because you don't have an audience who's paid money for good money for tickets, and to hear you kind of experiment, right? But on the other hand, that kind of practicing and just experimenting and just changing things around is also important.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you again so much for your time. And where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Okay, well, my website is samurai-walk, as in walking.com, samurai-walk.com. And on the website, there's a tab that says social media links, and that takes you to my Instagram and YouTube and all the goodies, the LinkedIn. But it would be www.samurai, SAMURAI -WALK .com.
All right. Well, and everybody can check out all this information in the description box below. Any final words on Shin Gyo Soo, or any advice for people approaching Seoul?
Yeah, well, you've actually got me thinking a lot about this because I teach what we call the Santai, or the three bodies, or the three scripts, and it's an important aspect of the training. In fact, I just got a wonderful book called "Delight in 1,000 Characters." This is the Senjimon, which actually just does the Shin and the Gyo, Shin and the Soul. So this is the classic, 1,000 characters. They're all different. And I've been thinking about, rather than, okay, here's how you paint this one, here's how you paint this one, here's how you paint this one, how can you find the connection, the missing link that, and I'm going to end with a story that Furukawa Roshi, the Zen master at Rinji, told me. He said, why is it that the more you master, the higher you go in an art, you must simultaneously protect the tradition and break it? That was like my Zen koan, right? You got to do both.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I think this is a quote from Picasso, and it says, "I can actually paint, right?" I always found that just like absolutely amazing. And yeah. I really resonate with that idea of protecting and then but breaking at the same time. And I'm much more of a breaker. I'm much more of a rule breaker when it comes to performing. I'm much more interested in expressing what I have to say, and I think that has a lot to do just with the filigree of being young, and wanting to explore the different vicissitudes, and discover one's own individual voice. Outside of the tradition.
Well, I do a lot of speaking, television, and also, of course, teaching in college. And I always have a plan, but I never have a script. So I have themes, but then I'm not reading from a script because people respond differently to different parts of it, right? And then I remember other things that maybe it was a remark somebody made, or maybe just while I'm talking, something else came up that was not part of the plan. Yeah. So I improvise, but I do have a plan. It's planned happenstance.
Yeah, I think that's another great point too. Is that especially in speaking, that we have to let's say if we have something like randomly now I have this story, and this story fits so perfectly, you can't just remove yourself from it and say, well, I'm not going to tell this story now because I have a planned script that I must follow. Yeah. Especially if the audience is really loving on one area that you get to, and you see a huge reaction from them. You got to keep going with that. You have to change the plan there.
Why keep that away from them, right? Why not share it with them, right?
Well,
then the challenge there, and then we can wrap it up. But the challenge there is that it's easy to get carried away with all the new things that you remember and the spontaneity, and suddenly you're out of time and you haven't really wrapped it together into a conceivable conclusion. And so to make sure that doesn't happen today, maybe I can ask you, what is your main takeaway from today?
The main takeaway from today for me is understanding the balance between what the traditional the tradition of Shin. Where you grab your material from. So if I'm within my tradition and I'm going to be using Shin as my basis to then form the soul afterwards, what am I changing the material? So is it the actual form? So the form of the piece might stay the same, but what about the materials of the inside? Versus, do I not change any of the materials on the inside of the piece, but then change the form? There's a lot of times in the music that we just have repetition. Well, what if I just took out all the repetition but played it all as Shin? Well, then I have a form that is now soul, but I have, and then so I'm now thinking of different ways of what soul actually means for me. So I had one before we started this. Now, especially looking at the the gardens in the paths, I'm now actually thinking that I'm missing an entire world of Soul, an entire world of Shin that was
Ah,
never actually present for me before.
okay. You mean the blend of certain of elements of both? Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying? Yeah.
and I
That
knew about that, but I didn't think about it in terms of a musical sense, where I could then the form of the piece and then the material that was it's inside of it.
that's really interesting, and that gives me an idea because sometimes when I'm painting kaisho or shin, my hand feels so free. It's like I'm not holding to this rigid discipline at all. And then I'll try to transfer when I'm doing so. I try to keep the real precision, and it seems to work if you blend. Like the form looks loose and flowing and spontaneous, but there's a real line of focus and decision, or the form looks really formal, but it's quite casual and relaxed. So it's fun to blend them, actually, if you think about it.
Yeah. Also, like, man, I could just keep going on for hours, I think. But I like calligraphy that kind of like swirls around, like on the page, very artistically. But like all of it's very clean and written. But it might spiral around a painting that's with there. I'm thinking of even some of the works by Emma Seiko, or even like Uragami Gyokudo, where it's like you have like this musical chin like sound on the page, and then the characters dance along with the painting that's on there as well. And so now I'm even thinking, like more calligraphy wise, but how can I make that the sound of that on the flute? And I think that also now is making me flash back to our collaboration event
Yeah,
for that as well.
great. Yeah. Well, we certainly have more to talk about that in future collaborations as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I know that my students will definitely appreciate this video, and so I hope everybody learned something from it. I know I learned a bunch from it, so looking forward to our future
Yeah.
collaboration.
Thanks, Sean. You have a good evening.